In 1860, the American South stood at the precipice of a revolution that would reshape the nation and the world. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a man who openly opposed the expansion of slavery, was the final straw that broke the fragile peace between the North and the South. But the roots of this conflict ran deep, stretching back decades and touching on issues of labor, economy, and fundamental beliefs about human rights and the nature of society itself. The South, with its economy heavily dependent on slave labor, saw itself as a bulwark against the growing tide of industrialization and democracy that was sweeping the North. In their eyes, the institution of slavery was not just an economic necessity, but a moral and social good. They believed that it provided a stable, hierarchical society where everyone knew their place, and where the white aristocracy could maintain their wealth and power. This belief was so deeply ingrained that it became the cornerstone of Southern identity and politics. However, the world was changing, and the South was increasingly isolated. The North had embraced industrialization and urbanization, which led to the rise of a new class of workers and a growing demand for social and economic reform. The abolitionist movement, which sought to end slavery and promote equality, gained momentum, especially in the North. This movement was not just a moral crusade. It was also driven by economic factors. Northern industries needed a steady supply of raw materials, and they began to see the South's reliance on slave labor as a barrier to progress. The Southern response to these challenges was to double down on their commitment to slavery. They saw the North's push for abolition as a threat to their way of life and their economic interests. They demanded stronger laws to protect the institution of slavery, including the Fugitive Slave Act, which required Northerners to assist in the capture and return of runaway slaves. They also sought to expand slavery into new territories, believing that this would secure their future and strengthen their political power. The South's strategy was to use its political influence to protect and expand slavery. They had dominated American politics for much of the nation's history, holding key positions in the federal government and using their power to shape national policy. They believed that they could maintain this dominance and use it to resist the North's efforts to limit or abolish slavery. However, this strategy was built on a false assumption that the North would always be divided and that the South could always outmaneuver its opponents. In reality, the North was growing stronger, both economically and politically. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the Northern economy, creating new industries and a prosperous middle class. This economic growth fueled a demand for political change and a greater voice in government. The Republican Party, which had been formed in opposition to the expansion of slavery, gained strength and eventually nominated Abraham Lincoln for president in 1860. Lincoln's election was a clear signal that the North was no longer willing to tolerate the South's demands. The South's response was to secede from the Union. Beginning with South Carolina in December 1860, one state after another left the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. They believed that they could establish an independent nation, based on the principles of slavery and states' rights. They were confident in their military strength and their ability to defend their new nation. However, they underestimated the North's resolve and the cost of the war that would follow. The Civil War was a brutal and devastating conflict that lasted 4 years and claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans. The South, despite its initial advantages, was eventually overwhelmed by the North's superior resources and manpower. The war ended with the defeat of the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery. The South was left in ruins, its economy in shambles, and its social order shattered. The end of the Civil War did not bring an end to the South's struggle. The Reconstruction period that followed was marked by political turmoil and social upheaval. The freed slaves, now citizens, were promised land and political rights, but these promises were often broken. The South, determined to maintain white supremacy, implemented a system of segregation and racial discrimination that would last for another century. The legacy of the Civil War and the institution of slavery continues to shape American society today. The economic and social disparities between the North and the South, the ongoing struggle for racial equality, and the deep divisions in American politics can all be traced back to this period. The South's decision to secede and fight for the preservation of slavery was a catastrophic mistake that had far-reaching consequences for the entire nation. In the end, the South's dedication to an outdated and morally indefensible system cost them dearly. The world had moved on, and the South's refusal to adapt led to its downfall. The Civil War was a turning point in American history, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. The South's dream of a slave-based society was shattered, and the nation embarked on a long and difficult journey toward a more just and equal future. The Civil War was a tragic and avoidable conflict that should serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of clinging to outdated beliefs and refusing to adapt to a changing world. The lessons of this period are still relevant today, as we continue to grapple with issues of race, equality, and the direction of our society. The South's story is a reminder that the forces of progress and change cannot be stopped, and that those who resist them do so at their own peril.